Maybe message on the group we're going live. Everybody's quiet. Okay, shall we start? I think we should begin now. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we are we are here for our last and fourth talk, interactive session with Avinish, and he's going to speak about the evolution of Assamese architecture and the prevalence of Assamese architecture in the changing times. So this interactive talk is a part of the Destination Northeast Festival, which National Museum has organized, and it's a week-long program. We started on 1st of November, and today is the last day when we are going to wind up this program with our valedictory in the auditorium at 5 to 6 p.m. So just as a brief to tell you about this program, as a part of the celebration of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav to commemorate 75 years of progressive India and the glory of its people, culture and achievements, the National Museum, New Delhi is celebrating the rich heritage of Northeast India under the Ministry of Donor and NEC's initiative titled Destination Northeast India. The celebration, it commences on 1st of November and it will continue till today, which is 7th of November 2021. The National Museum, New Delhi houses an outstanding collection of artifacts representing the cultural diasporas of the Northeast India and contributes to the celebration of Northeast India, for which we are organizing this week-long series of cultural performances, online lectures, and guided tours of the Northeast Tribal Lifestyle Gallery in order to highlight the diverse cultural traditions and communities of the Northeast India. So Dr. Sama Haq will introduce our speaker for today, and then we will begin for the talk.
Thank you, Abira. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Avinivesh, for agreeing to deliver this talk today. I will briefly introduce you to our audience. Avinivesh Sharma is an art conservator, restorer, and a collector of artifacts. He has worked with Tata Trust's Art Conservation Initiative, and he is currently involved in the curation of galleries at the Mahabahu Brahmaputra River Heritage Center. He will also soon be involved in the documentation of objects to be displayed at the Museum of Dakhni Pat Satra in the river island of Majuli, Assam. So, Avinivesh, over to you. Let us
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let me share the screen first and then proceed. Is it on screen?
Yeah, we can see.
Thank you. A very good afternoon to everyone. I'm Avinivesh, and it's an absolute privilege to address you all at an event organized by the National Museum and on Northeast India. And today I'll be speaking, as the title suggests, on Assam type architecture, the history and evolution of this architecture, which was developed keeping in mind the climatic conditions of the region. And it's very unique to not only the state of Assam, but also the neighboring states of Arunachal Pradesh, Meghalaya, and a part that has gone to Bangladesh, which is Philip. But before I trace the origin of this architecture, which we now know as Assam type, and the patrons, the socio-cultural significance, and the architectural features, I'd like to share a very special and a very interesting anecdote, which actually gives you an idea about how this architecture has been valued by the people in this valley and who has called Assam their home, and also attests to the endurance and the durability of these structures. So I belong to a place called Jorhat in Assam, in Upper Assam, and that's my hometown. And just a few miles away from Jorhat Medical College, there is a very old hospital, which we call as Mission Hospital, and which actually was previously it was called the Jorhat Christian Medical Center. So in 1924, there was this donation that was made by an American couple, and utilizing that donation, the Jorhat Christian Medical Center was set up. So in the initial stages, two doctors joined. One was Dr. Kirby, and the other was Dr. Elkis, who was an eye surgeon. So both had different personalities, contrasting personalities. So Dr. Kirby and Dr. Elkis actually built their half of the hospital to different standards. One to Western standard with hollow walls, tile on each side, and with polished white marble floors in his operating room. And on the other hand, Dr. Kirby actually built his operating room and the 15-bed inpatient unit within an Assamese context with half-timbered wall frames filled with split bamboo lattices, mud plasters, and whitewashed. So Dr. Kirby actually never relented of his criticism of the extravagance that was expended on Elkis' operating room. Interestingly, I found recently an account written by Dr. Kenneth Donson, who was in Jorhat from 1957 to 1981. He was a very famous doctor. He wrote that 50 years later, surgical procedures were still done in the same operating room that was built by Elkis, but termites had invaded and destroyed the hollow walls. They had to be replaced, while Dr. Kirby's, which was built in an Assamese standard, the Kirby's bamboo walls remain intact today. So this gives you an idea about how why this structure was preferred over other types in this part of the country. And which actually brings us to a very interesting backstory, and my objective today in this talk is to take you through that journey of how Assam type architecture came into being and how it has evolved over the last 120 years. So Assam, as we know, is situated in a quake vulnerable zone. So it is, in a sense, prone to high intensity earthquakes. And two of the largest earthquakes in Assam's recorded history, the 1897 earthquake, which in Assamese we call it as Bor Bhoikapa, and the 1950 Assam-Tibet earthquake, which actually changed the course of the Brahmaputra. And these earthquakes, which has been recorded in different accounts, actually not only changed the topography of the region, but also had a tremendous impact on the social dynamics of this area, which was previously known as undivided Assam. So a notable change that occurred in the aftermath of the 1897 earthquake, which I've stated earlier is known as Bor Bhoikapa, was seen in the housing designs. And a special type of construction, which became eventually a typical building type that I've stated earlier is Assam type, came into being. And it was a brainchild of a team of British geologists and a team of Japanese seismologists who visited Shillong a few months after the earthquake. And they studied the local environment and the locally available building materials, and adding their observations of earthquake-resistant construction systems devised elsewhere, suggested that all the government buildings in Assam province ought to be built according to this type. A result, of course, of their meticulous research. And these light, flexible buildings could move with a swaying caused by tremors and were suitable for the humid climate. So you can see some pictures here of the earthquake. Three of the pictures are from Shillong because Shillong was the most affected. And all the prominent buildings that you see were actually razed to the ground. This is the government house on the top. Then there's the All Saints Cathedral. And below, the structure which existed before, the residency, was also razed to the ground. So every prominent building, the government buildings, which were built, which are pakka structures, were razed to the ground. But before I proceed to elaborate the features and the influences, I think it's very important to remember the antecedents. So what preceded this architecture? So like it just came into being after 1897, but there were different influences. And from my personal observation in my study, I could trace the influences as from Far Eastern, which is Japanese and Chinese. Then we have local features, the vernacular architecture, and also very prominently in Shillong and these places, the influence of Neo-Tudor architecture, or what we call as Tudor revival. So the Assam's architectural history goes back to the time of ancient Kamrupa. And the epigraphic and architecture remains from Kamrupa, especially during the reign of Varman, Pala, and Salastamba dynasty, testify to the use of stone as a common building material, and occasionally, of course, bricks. However, excessive rainfall and earthquakes occurring and recurring at intervals led to the disintegration and collapse of a majority of structures made of stone and bricks. Now, this is the ancient period. what actually brought about a change was after the Ahoms came to the Brahmaputra Valley in the 13th century. So there was a marked change in the use of building materials after the Thai Ahoms arrived. And in the early period, they primarily used local and temporary materials such as wood, bamboo to build religious, secular structures. And the elegant wooden mansions built by them finds mention in the Shihabuddin Talis's account called Tariq-i Assam. He says and he writes that a special officer of the royal court designated as Changrung Fukan. Chang means expert, Rung means house, and Fukan is the Ahom officer, was appointed to look after the Royal Public Works Department. And in 1609, there was a marked change with the appointment of Momai Tamuli Borborua, who was the Borborua, an Ahom post, the title, who actually introduced a very revolutionary system called a pike system. And under his stewardship, the agrarian structure underwent a sea change. He devised a village resettlement policy way back in the 17th century, starting from Nagaon, which is a district in Assam, and each village was to have a family of potters, carpenters, jewelers, Brahmins, and between two villages, a household of the Vaishnavite priestly class called Gokhais and Mohantas. The Borborua, interestingly, held the position of Bor Tamuli and looked after the royal estate before he became the Borborua. Therefore, he laid particular emphasis on the layout of each house in the villages. The houses were to be raised on a higher plinth and would comprise of units like Borghor, which is the main room, Marol Ghor, which is like a janana for women, Sora Ghor, which is the guest room, Randhani Ghor, which is the kitchen, and Bhoral Ghor, which is the cow pen. Bamboo and betel. So when you talk about vernacular architecture in Assam, we also tend to stress emphasis on the landscaping. So what surrounded that structure or a house? So bamboo and betel nut trees were strongly recommended in the private estates. And this project was implemented up till Koliabor, currently a subdivision in the Nagaon district of Assam, when Mughal invasion from the west led to the suspension and the project was later shelved. However, Momai Tamuli Borborua's village resettlement project was hugely influential in the long run and shaped the vernacular architecture of the Brahmaputra Valley. So when we talk about Assam type architecture, and I talk about the antecedents, also very important to talk about the vernacular architecture, which actually had a tremendous influence in the houses, on the Assam type houses in the Brahmaputra Valley. So Assam, interestingly, consists of dense forest, as we all know, and the settlements mainly grew on the banks of rivers. So when we talk about the materials being used in the construction of the houses, as you can see an artistic depiction in this painting, materials such as ikora, which is reed, which can be found along the banks of the Brahmaputra, bamboo and straw were commonly used as building materials. Ethnic communities like the Missings build their houses on platforms, which is called sanghors, which is made of bamboo and raised enough to protect them from flood. The ones in the hills, the Nagas especially, were made of timber, which was easily available in the hilly regions and kept the house warm during winters. The hill houses were higher than their counterparts in the river valley, allowing elephants and other wild animals to cross under. So just comparatively, with if you compare with the houses, the sanghors in the Brahmaputra Valley, with those in the hills, especially the Khasi Hills, Khasi Jaintia, Garo Hills, and Naga Hills, they're higher just to allow the animals to cross under. The geographical reasons, interestingly, demanded their use, but the non-tribals shunned the plan of Changhors and instead raised the plinth of the house as much as possible to protect from clogged rainwater and dampness. The exposed section of the plinth is called Pirali, which we also call as Kathi. And the rural houses in the Brahmaputra Valley were usually utilitarian, very simple and without much embellishment. Walls were made of bamboo plastered with layers of mud and cow dung, and bamboo mats and frames were used to reinforce the plinth. And also the doors were very simple, with bamboo crossbars. For thatching, straw of the ulu, horon, and the barota was used, and sometimes leaves of toko tree was used for roofing. Sometimes buruli is known as buruli straw, also placed below. So there were different layers of thatching in a sense. The buruli straw below, and then we have the other types of ulu and horon hair or a straw on the top. Traditionally, there are very interesting folklore associated with the building of houses in the Brahmaputra Valley. So traditionally, before building a house, people in the villages of Brahmaputra Valley consulted building experts, astrologers, and the more experienced folk of the village about the selection of the site for construction and the placement of the house. But mostly, they built the houses themselves and as per the requirements. The aphorisms of Dak, which is a body of traditional sayings on agricultural practices attributed to a legendary bird, were followed. And one of its saying went, it should face the east and should have its back to the west. To the east should be planted cane, and to the west a bamboo grove. To the north should be the Ereka nut palm, which is known as Tamul, and cultivable lands to the south. Another stated, the granary in the east and the cow pen in the west, kitchen in the north and farmland in the south. Even today, people in the rural areas follow the principles available in this folklore. It is considered to be inauspicious as well if skulls and bones are found underneath, especially in the digging in the site, and they are dug out before the central pole called Ghai Khuta or the Bor Khuta is placed to mark the beginning of construction. Posts were usually made of timber extracted from trees such as Nahor, Bonsum, Sal, Sunaru, Sam, and jackfruit. Among the bamboo species, Bolukaba, Mokaba, and Jatiba were frequently used. The bottom ends of the poles were burned a little to drive away insects, which is very interesting. And the general plan featured a central courtyard, and around it were different units of the house. The Sora Ghor, which is the Alohi Ghor guest, where you welcome the guests. The Bor Ghor, which is the main house. The Marol Ghor, as I stated earlier, is Zenana. The Huoni Ghor, which is the bedroom. The Buloni Ghor, which is the living room or the lounge. Randhoni Ghor, which is the kitchen. The Dheki Khal, which is a husking shed. And Tat Khal, which is a loom shed. And the Alohi Ghor was connected to the rest of the house by means of a passage called Digholibat. And the kitchen was usually on the last row, detached from the other rooms for reasons of cleanliness and fire safety. So interestingly, the Sora Ghor, the guest room, was where the family members received guests. And the Mas Sutar, the central courtyard, was the place for drying grains, making cane and bamboo items, as well as weaving textiles and singing lullabies to children. So it is where the family got together. And the family also got together around a fireplace during winters. In some households, during Magh Bihu, which is the third Bihu in a year, the Assamese New Year, is where the Bezi Pura or the bonfire was conducted. And in the wintry mornings, after taking bath, the family members rushed to this place, shivering to offer their prayers and warm themselves around the bonfire. The cow pen had no side walls, interestingly, and nobody was allowed to enter it without taking a bath. And it was the same for the kitchen and the Namghor, which is a private chapel, and as well as the Bhoral, which is the granary, where grains were stored. All the rooms had two doors facing one another. So one very special feature of Assamese houses is the cross ventilation. So there is one door here, and there should be a door on the opposite. There's a window here, there's a window on the opposite. There are ventilators as well. So all the rooms had two doors facing one another, high ceiling, and bamboo lattices called bhapolika on the top of walls to facilitate cross ventilation. So this is what prevailed in before the Britishers arrived, and it actually still exists today in the rural areas of Assam. But after the coming of the British and the consolidation of its hold over what we know at that point of time known as Assam province, towards the later 19th century, a number of masonry buildings were constructed, which is very different from the bungalows being built in the tea gardens. And so in Shillong, for example, you had masonry buildings, and in bungalows, the tea bungalows, you had bungalows built of the walls made of bamboo and ikora with thatched roof. But the ones in Shillong and Guwahati and Dibrugarh and these towns, all these structures included religious structures, which were masonry, such as Christ Church in Guwahati, the All Saints Church in Shillong, and secular structures such as Government House in Shillong and the Northbrook Gate in Guwahati. Most of the buildings, interestingly, that the Britishers built with bricks and limestone, and even the ones built with lath and plaster, were razed to the ground when a severe earthquake occurred on June 12, 1897. It occurred in the Shillong Plateau, and its moment magnitude of 8.1, and it's just supposed to be one of the largest earthquakes at a point of time. And the aftershocks could be felt as far as Peshawar in Pakistan, modern day Pakistan. Although the mortality rate of 1542, which is 1,542 people, was not that high, great damage was done to the tea gardens in Assam and Kachar and the towns of Shillong, Guwahati, Gwalpara, and Dhubri. Damage even extended to Kolkata, where several buildings were badly defaced or they partially collapsed. The eyewitness accounts presents a graphic picture of what prevailed at a point of time, and the demolition of Pakka buildings and bridges in Gwalpara, Dhubri, Shillong, and Dibrugarh. One very interesting letter I would like to read out to us was written by a lady called May Sweet, who was a wife of a British official named Williamson Sweet. In a letter written to her sister, Sweet gives a horrifying account of the fateful day. She writes, "I write to you as you know Shillong so well. It will be easier to tell you about it all. It's wonderful that I'm alive to write about it all or anyone else. If it had happened in a night a few hours later, hardly anyone would have been alive. It was all so horribly sudden. And then I've come here to see my house, Yogadan, on the ground. Literally, there is not a stone left standing on another in the whole station. One or two Kacha houses are half standing but unsafe. Poor Maccabee, we heard how he was buried when riding home, but could not believe it. The cottons narrowly escaped being crushed. It's dreadful. We've had continuous shocks ever since and yesterday." It was a terrible earthquake, and the earthquake actually necessitated the rebuilding of Shillong and its surrounding areas. And it also necessitated the adoption of a system of disaster relief to help the community return to normality and establish a path towards long-term resistance. One of the ways in which the British administration sought to create resilience was through architectural intervention. A special type of construction, as I've stated earlier, was devised by a team of British geologists led by Richard Dixon Oldham and Japanese seismologists led by Fusakisi Omori, which became the typical building type, dotting the townscape of erstwhile Assam province. Two important reports of the earthquake were published by Sir Edward Gate, widely known as the author of A History of Assam, and other by Richard Dixon Oldham in 1899. Oldham's widely acclaimed memoir on the Great Earthquake of 1897 is seminal for its seismological observations, insights, and conclusions. Oldham prepared his 62-page report based primarily on the post-earthquake investigation of his colleagues, especially Lau Tauche, who visited Shillong just after the earthquake. Apart from studying the physics of the earthquake, Oldham also provided a unique insight into the buildings that survived the tremor and its aftershocks. During his own traverse of the region in the winter months, he studied the local environment and locally available building materials and argued that all the government buildings in Assam ought to be built according to a specific type of construction based on seismic engineering, which would make the buildings light and flexible, thus resistant to earthquakes. He noticed that the houses made of entirely timber, which bend like willow, were extant, and most of the Pakka buildings collapsed. Another important contributor, Fusakisi Omori, the very famous seismologist, Japanese seismologist, functioned as the Shin Basira of seismic learning in Japan, collaborated closely with engineers to come up with models of earthquake-resistant construction at Imperial University of Tokyo. He worked there. And he prepared a detailed report after his visit to Shillong in 1897 and suggested elaborate wooden joinery and Wagoya-type traditional roof framing based on the models at Imperial University. So these reports were very important and actually is very crucial to the birth of this structure, of this architecture, which we now known as Assam type. So the earliest prototype, in a sense, that we locate is the government house in Shillong, which we now known as the Raj Bhavan, which actually houses the governor of Meghalaya, is the earliest prototype that I could actually find. The construction started in 1898, according to the rules and regulations led by Omori and Oldham and other engineers. And this was built in 1898, and the construction finished in 1903. So the earliest building, the Assam type structure, the prototype, actually was completed in 1903. So that's 120 years ago, almost 120 years ago. And the timeline that I've stated here, as you can see here, so the earthquakes struck in 1897, June 1897. The seismologists and the geologists arrived in Shillong soon after that. And in 1898, as I've stated, the government house, or at the point now Raj Bhavan, Mr. Arundel actually drew up a sketch plan for a government house in May 1898, and which was to be of earthquake-proof pattern, as I stated earlier, using timber frames with ikora covered with plaster in between, and the roof was made of thick shingles, and it was completed in 1903. So the first 4 decades actually saw the evolution of this architecture, which we know as Assam type. And a very important influence was the Neo-Tudor architecture. So Neo-Tudor architecture, interestingly, is actually known for its steeply pitched roof, half timbering, just give me a second. So half timbering windows, tall chimneys, and jolted first floors above pillared porches and dormer windows as well. So it was adopted from England in British colonies such as New Zealand, which was adopted by Francis Peter, and in Singapore, which was known as Black and White House by R.A.J. Bidwell. So these are very simple houses, very simple design, and actually concentrated more on the simple but quaintly picturesque Elizabethan cottage, and which was shorn of the brick and battlemented splendor. It's a very simple house, and which was to resemble what was thought to be an idyllic Elizabethan village. So this type of architecture actually influenced Assam type mainly in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. But gradually it was adopted by the Assamese and the Bengali middle class, and they actually rendered their own versions and their own elements into that architecture. And it was much later, around 1940s and 50s, that this came to be known as the Assam type. So before it was earthquake resistant structures. And when we actually added elements from the vernacular architecture, it came to be known as Assam type. So the first 4 decades of the 20th century saw not only government buildings, but public halls, such as the Quinton Memorial Hall in Shillong, the Curzon Hall in Guwahati, and the Bisturam Borua Hall in Jorhat, and private residences built in Assam type style. In the private residences, interestingly, various features of vernacular architecture were accommodated, and the owners took in influences from the housing styles in Calcutta and abroad. As I've stated earlier, the influence of Tudor architecture was seen, especially the steeply pitched gable roof, half timber walls, bay windows, chimneys, and mixed use of building materials such as use of bricks and stones for the first floor and wood for the upper floors in 2-storied houses. As in Far Eastern traditional architecture, emphasis was laid on increasing the wall quality of strength as multiple high walls of bamboo and reed mesh set in a wooden framework and plastered with mud facilitated insulation and rendered flexibility and reinforcements with the use of braces. So different elements were added, especially this Japanese seismic engineering, just to make it earthquake resistant. But Assam type houses were not only built to be earthquake resistant, but also to be conducive for the humid climate. So the ceiling was very high, the walls were very high, and cross ventilation was ensured through ventilators and through windows and doors situated on opposite ends. In the following decades, especially during the interwar years, with the addition of some unique architectural features, this special type of construction popularly came to be known as Assam type. Very important to remember the contribution of the Chinese carpenters as well. So the Chinese carpenters were employed to build such houses. And it is stated that the Japanese carpentry was developed through Chinese wooden architecture influences. The Chinese community in erstwhile Calcutta were involved in a number of professions, carpentry being a major one. In matters of skill and ingenuity, the Chinese carpenters were held in high esteem, both by the Europeans and the Indian elite. The emerging Assamese and Bengali middle class, both Muslim and Hindus, mostly clerks were working in European tea estates, tea companies, and for government, lawyers and LMP doctors, availed the services of the Chinese carpenters from Calcutta when they built their houses. Chinaputtis or China ghettos grew in places like Makum, Margherita, Nagaon, and Shillong. The Chinese carpenters from Makum were often employed to build bungalows in tea gardens of Upper Assam and the industrial towns of Margherita and Digboi. Houses in the Nefa colony of Margherita, references to which can be found in former Chief Education Officer of Nefa, Indira Mire's memoir, were built by Assamese Chinese from Makum, who came in the 19th century to set up the tea gardens for the Britishers. And Dr. Pratafati Borua, a prominent medical practitioner from Nagaon, whose father stayed there in the 1950s, recalled the temporary sheds built by the Chinese and them having Dhekia Khat, which is Fiddlehead Farms, with Rice in a telephonic interview with the author. So that is me. And the plan of Assam type houses actually evolved during the interwar years, especially during the Second World War, with new materials coming in. The materials mainly used were sun suruki, which is lime mortar, and then cement came in, and CGI sheets were used for roofing. So the houses built in the hilly areas were square and had one side built on stilts to ease out of the slope. So usually the houses that you see, the Assam type houses, built in the 1930s and 40s, were usually L or U shaped. And it differed from the ones that were built in Shillong, in Nagaland, as well as in Arunachal. Some recognizable features of the upgraded Assam type architecture are a steeply pitched roof, that is 22 degrees to 45 degrees inclination for greater air volume, porte cochere, which is the covered entrance, tin and corrugated galvanized iron roofing, CGI roofing, roof vents, barge boards, which is very beautifully decorated by Chinese carpenters, wooden barge boards, which is also called eaves board, high false ceilings, sometimes having a massive height of 12 to 20 feet decorative staircases, high brick walls, and also higher walls made of ikora and bamboo. So the brick walls were below, and on the top, the walls were made of the 2 layers of ikora and bamboo to ensure insulation. And the floors, of course, bay windows became prominent. You can see a bay window below, and there's the Sora Ghor on the right. There's a Digholi Bath, which is the passage linking different rooms on the top right. And left, you can see the barge boards. Very beautifully designed, beautifully decorated wooden barge boards. So landscaping was as important as the architecture or the house. So particular plants had to be planted there in the garden. And the Assam type architecture usually had a flower garden in the front and the pasoli bari, which is called the vegetable garden, at the back. So landscaping was very important, even the plants that were supposed to be planted there. So Assam was also ridden by plagues, cholera, black fever. So there was this particular plant called akon, which was planted in the in the front garden of the Assam type houses, because it is believed that it could shove away cholera. And particular plants were, of course, not planted there, including the khokon gauze, which was believed to actually, if you plant the khokon gauze, it actually created a rift among the family members. So there were laws associated with the planting in the gardens. So landscaping was very, very important in a Assam type house. So seasonal vegetables were there, medicinal plants were there, and fruit trees were also grown there. And the portable water requirement of the household was usually from a brick wall open well. So if you see the 1930s and 1940s houses, the bathrooms are away from the house. So you have to walk to the bathrooms from the main house and then go to the laboratory. But later in 1950s and 60s, as it evolved, attached bathrooms became very, very common. Although the building materials were fetched locally, the zamindars of Lower Assam and the aristocrats, mostly tea planters and lawyers of Jorhat, Sibsagar, Nagaon, Golaghat, and Shillong, brought building materials from as far as England. Especially tin sheets were important from Birmingham, Poland, Belgium, and Ireland. Initially, the Surkhi mortar, and then Portlet cement was used frequently in the erection of half walls, and Burmese teak wood was used for the construction of doors, windows, and ventilators. The landed gentry in the villages too were inspired by their counterparts, settled in the towns, and huge houses with the aforementioned features were built in rural areas. However, as families became nuclear, huge houses became a rarity by the 1950s. And the number of rooms came down from as many as 14, if you see the houses built in 1930s, to around 6. And attached toilets, as I said earlier, became a very common feature, especially in the towns. Now, the housing was completed by 1950s. So by 1950s, 40s, and late 40s, people came to know that this is an Assam type structure, it's an earthquake resilient structure. But you had to have a test whether these could survive an earthquake. So another devastating earthquake happened on August 15, 1950. But this time there was much less damage to the houses, in spite of the scale. The importance of this construction was thus substantiated. An important addition to the house post the earthquake of 1950 were the iron railway tracks as foundation pillars, or addition of one iron rod spiraling inside the entire length of the pillar, cast in cement mortar. CGI sheets were increasingly used for roofing as straw became difficult to obtain. This is a very important thing to realize how it has evolved. And settlements like Puroni Gudam in Nagaon, Torajan in Jorhat, Lotakhil and Jorpukuri in Guwahati, Dhankheti, Bishnupur, Laban, and Oakland in Shillong, Amulapoti in Sibsagar were filled with Assam-type houses constructed by government employees and businessmen, both Assamese and Bengalis. And even the Khasis, especially in Meghalaya, beautiful houses built by the Khasi gentlemen. The lighter constructions underwent further modifications in the following decades. Now that I've talked about the architecture influences, the architecture features, and the different elements that were added in the course of time, it's very important to realize that Assam-type houses are not only important from the heritage point of view because of its architecture features, but also because of it has been a witness to a remarkable time in Assam's history, modern history. It has been a mute witness to landmark events about social transformations. And this is something that I really want to talk about in the conclusion. So I found a very interesting memoir by the pioneering educationist, lady educationist, who actually founded the first women's college in Brahmaputra Valley, the Handic Girls College. Her name was Rajabala Das. So in her memoir, it was written in the early decades of 20th century, she actually gives a graphic picture of an Assam-type house, how it was in the early decades. And she writes, the houses had a front yard, as I've said earlier, and a backyard or a back garden. The area between the street and the Soraghor, which is where you welcome the guests, was called Aksutal, or the front yard. And there was a bamboo netted fence between the front yard and the backyard, and the latter situated closer to Huaghor, the bedroom, Nandhoni Ghor, which is a kitchen, the Namghor, which is a private chapel. So, as evident from the memoir, where she writes that the female members were not allowed to venture out to the front yard, and strangers were not permitted to enter the backyard. So, actually, it's evident from her memoir that the central or the inner courtyard of the house and the backyard was where the women's activities remained confined to. They wove textiles there, sang lullabies to children, and shared stories from the epics. Offering prayers in the Namghor was a daily ritual, and so was cooking in the Randhani Ghor. The daughters-in-law read aloud the verses from the epics or the kirtan in the evening to their mothers-in-law, sometimes while sitting at a corner of the kitchen. In the following decades, more women were educated and gradually became involved in the public sphere. So that's mainly starting from 1940s. And they also led political gatherings during the freedom movement. Meetings of Mohila committees, which are women's associations, were actually held in the houses of women who were actively involved in the affairs of the organization. The Soraghor, as you can see the picture here on below right, were always teeming with people, both in the rural areas and in towns. And village panchayats were sometimes held here, as well as in the front yard, especially in the houses of the village elders. Political gatherings took place in the front yards during the freedom movement. The first committee of Assam Provincial Congress was formed in the Soraghor, just like you see here, of Navin Chandra Bordloy, in a sprawling Assam-type house near Jorpukuri Tank in Guwahati in 1921. And the Namghor, located in the front yard of renowned lawyer and freedom fighter Krishna Sharma's house in Jorhat, saw a revolutionary development in 1934. So the Brahmins had actually prohibited the entry of the other castes into the Namghor. So he was one person who actually had the courage to let them in. And because he was a Gandhian and he was influenced by Gandhi's rhetorics. So when Mahatma Gandhi came in 1934, he was invited to inaugurate the Namghor, the private chapel and the temple, to the Harijans. But which actually consequently led to his ostracization from the village. People didn't like it and they actually ostracized him from the community. There was a revolutionary development because it actually inspired other people to do so. So this private chapel of this Assam-type house of Krishna Sharma actually saw a revolutionary development at the point of time. Another very interesting thing is the secret meetings. So the Quit India movement as it happened in Assam is unparalleled because Assam was transformed by that war, Second World War, and the Quit India movement. The secret meetings of the Congress volunteers were held in the Alohi Ghor, or a guest room, or the Bulani Ghor, which is a lounge, or even the tea sheds of Assam-type houses, and who actually supported the sabotaging activities. And Congress volunteers, numbering in hundreds, were fed in the front yard of such houses, belonging to tea planters, belonging to freedom fighters. And one very interesting thing was that many of these houses actually saw some very progressive activities. So the bioscope was shown in an Assam type house in Laktokia in Guwahati in 1921. And then we had the first women's journal coming out from a Assam type house called in Melasakor and Sibsagar, which is called Ghor Jyoti. So these unique historical aspects of these houses, not only the architectural features, actually are pointers to how they were central to the modern history of Assam and the culture it has as well. Unfortunately, many of these prominent Assam type houses have given way to RCC buildings, and only few have survived the wrath of time. Time and desolation have ravaged them and in many ways changed the face of these vital markers of the state. So every place has a soul to it. So every city has identity markers. I personally consider these houses, these Assam type structures, to be to be the identity markers of a place like Dibrugarh or Guwahati or Jorhat or Nagaon and even the rural areas. So in the later half of the 20th century, we actually saw the profusion of RCC building, the reinforced cement concrete buildings. And the change was first conspicuous in the capital, the Guwahati, after it moved from Shillong after 1972. And further, the building materials also became scarce. So last year when I talked about, there's this actually a debate regarding how to conserve Assam type structures now that they have paved way for bigger concrete structures. Now the people who actually wish to conserve such structures actually have problems in how to go about it. So the last section in the conclusion, this aesthetically pleasing houses, now that in many places they are no more, has actually brought us to this point where we are discussing the conservation of these structures, but there's scarcity of labor, of carpenters who are actually experts in building these houses, which we call as Batami Ghor or Ponioli Ghor, Beror Ghor, or the timber wall structures. So the scarcity of labor being a major problem. Second is the other materials. The wood that was used at that point of time, if you try to find a replacement now, is very, very expensive. You also can't find Ikora very frequently nowadays. It's also very expensive. You have to fetch it. Now, the availability of construction materials has become very, very difficult. But from my experience and from what we did as a family last year, when we conserved our house, and also have seen in the renovation of the Mahabahu Brahmaputra River Heritage Center, which was previously the DC Bungalow, was that they have used alternative materials, which is also very, very durable. So even if you use bamboo in place of Ikora for walls, it actually has durability, and actually you can ensure the durability and the endurance of the house. It's not that we can find the exact materials now, it's very expensive. But the main problem which I've seen is the scarcity of carpenters to do this thing. So conservation of these structures have happened. The historic Cotton College buildings, especially the New Arts building, the chemistry building has been renovated. The Berry White Medical College in Dibrugarh has been renovated very well. Old DC Bungalow here in Guwahati. And I've heard that in the course of time, other structures in Guwahati as well as other places will be renovated. But what I propose from my point of view, and which I would like to share, is particular localities, which I've stated earlier, should be declared as heritage precincts, so as to save this type of architecture, and so as to tell the future generation about what architecture actually prevailed, what architecture prevailed in the early part of the 20th century, and what is suitable for a region like Assam, which is prone to high intensity earthquakes. But unfortunately, the resilient Assam type houses, following the ever-evolving vernacular architecture, is on the verge of being overhauled by concrete monstrosities. And if proper measures are not being taken, will not be taken, then we'll actually see no Assam type house in the future. But the good thing about the situation now is that the Assam government has actually taken interest in renovating these buildings. But I hope not only Guwahati, but as well as other structures will see the conservation and renovation in the course of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abhinivesh, for a really interesting talk. You brought out such amazing facets about this unique type of architecture We as students of art history, we have read a lot about Indian architecture or architectural spaces from ancient to medieval or even late modern time. But your talk certainly opens up a very new, not new primarily, but a lot of research and work has already taken place in this area. But it certainly has brought a lot of questions and curiosities. I, for one, would like to begin with my question, and then maybe we can open the discussion.
Sure.
You have mentioned that you use the word nuclear families. Right now, going through your demographics and your case studies of the Assam type architecture and the buildings that you help to restore or bring to light. Could you share something about the role of patronage, even if the families have gone nuclear? Where does the patronage lie of these really important and strategic houses? And how are the families what steps are the families taking to conserve them? Yeah.
Right. So it's not very common here, the renovation of buildings taken up by families. Very affluent families have been able to do that. So once the families become nuclear, they set up different houses. And sometimes because the families become nuclear, they set up houses within the same compound. So landscaping, which is very integral to Assam type houses, they're actually gone for a toss in a sense, because the other family members are building their houses either surrounding the main Assam type house or just desecrating it to pave way for a concrete building. But I've seen that in Guwahati and also in places like Jorhat and Nagaon, the families have taken the initiative to renovate. I've said that it's not very common, but particular families I've seen in Guwahati as well as in Jorhat and in Nagaon as well, that they have been able to fetch the carpenters from the villages nearby, who still practice the Batamighor renovation, and also fetch the materials like bamboo to actually, if there is any damage, if there is anything that can be done, they have been investing in it. And some families have actually got together to build a corpus to renovate the building and get together in that particular house at least once a year during Bihu or during pujas. So it's not very, very common, but families have been doing that across Assam. So that's a welcome step in Assam.
Okay.
We have one question. Like you have talked about the division of spaces in the houses, and then special spaces are allocated for the lavatory, for the kitchen and all. So we have a question like, is there any kind of relationship between the traditional text? Because like as from the artistry viewpoint, we have read about Vastu Purush Mandal. So while doing this whole planning of a house, so is there some traditional text Shilp Shastras which have been followed by the patrons or by the people who are commissioning these types of houses in the past or in the present?
So during my research, I found it fascinating that there is no written record of this. So it's all oral, it's folklore. So what I've told about the aphorisms of Dak is actually a tradition of, it's a body of traditional sayings which has been passed on from one generation to the other. There is no written text about it. But later in the 1950s and 60s, scholars and folklore scholars, especially folklorists, actually wrote about it, and we can find it in books. Especially by scholars such as Dr. Birinchi Kumar Borua, who wrote way back in the 1950s and about a cultural history of Assam. He has actually recorded each and every aphorism and folklore associated with this structure. But I have seen that in villages now, they do not consult any written text. It's all passed from one generation to the other, as prevalent in Northeast India. So Assam is no exception in that regard, I feel.
Okay, and do you also feel, it's coming out as my own curiosity, do you feel that this Assam type architecture, quote unquote, has also served as an architectural influence for the nearby states that were also under the colonial rule? Or do you think that this is a very unique representation within Assam? Do you think that the other states also have benefited from this style?
Yeah, so I've actually mainly the states in Northeast India. So at one of time, every state that actually separated, like Arunachal Pradesh, Meghalaya, Nagaland, Mizoram, and even Sylhet, which is in present-day Bangladesh, were a part of Assam. So all those states actually saw the building of this type because it was, patronized by the Britishers themselves, administration. So wherever they set up the government offices and buildings, even dispensaries and public halls, they actually proposed this architecture as the archetypal one.
Okay, and
Yeah, we have one question from Sumangal Raj Konwar. So he's asking, can Assam type houses based on what we saw in 1940s to 50s be attempted to be built today in Assam, considering all issues and complications which you have talked about?
So in order to build a house along the lines of the ones that was built in 1940s, you have to have an enormous compound, a huge plot of land where you can plant the trees and flower garden, the vegetable garden. You also have enough space for different units of the house. So you have to have a huge plot of land. But if you get a land of that proportion, I'm sure the carpenters who have been working in the villages, especially in places like Sunapur in Guwahati, in Tiok in Jorhat, there are people, the elderly people can actually help you build those houses because they still know how to build the Batami houses. But then with the newer generation, the carpenters becoming, they're taking to other structures. So it's also very difficult in a sense. But the materials that I have stated is easily available, but is a little expensive. So the call is on the owner. So if they want to rebuild that house, fetching those materials with that kind of amount and money.
could you also, I think I would take the opportunity and ask the last question before we end today. Could you also share some of your current work and your soon to be coming work in the field of restoration and conservation of such sites?
So actually my interest in Assam type houses actually started in last year. When during the COVID, we had nothing to do, me and my brother. So we decided that we went to a village and we suddenly decided we should renovate a part of the house, which had some 14 rooms. And it was impossible for us to renovate the whole house. It was very, very expensive. So I called my cousins, we built a corpus, and we decided to go ahead with the first phase of renovation and renovate the Soraghar, which is the open-sided structure for welcoming guests, and a radio room. It's a room which is actually called a radio room because the radio was kept there. So all the villagers used to get together and listen to radio at a point of time. So we renovated both these units of the house. And in spite of the COVID, in spite of the scarcity of the carpenters, we could finish the thing by, I think, we started around May 2020 and till August, September, we completed the renovation. But besides that, I have been working on the photographic history of Assam, the visual history of Assam, and I've been collecting old photographs. I've been telling stories through them through a project called Vintage Assam. And so I look at Assam history through different elements. So not only archival sources, but photographs, letters, I see through artifacts. So every object for me, which is like an heirloom passed on from grandmother or grandfather to his or grandchild, is a source for me. So I understand Assam history through these different objects. And it's fascinating because Assam has a polyphonic society. It's the melting pot of the East and the West. And it has given rise to varied cultures, which has its own typical features. And I consider this angle from the angle of an architect or through architecture as a fusion of these elements, the East and the West. So therefore, I stress equally on the Neo-Tudor, the vernacular, and the Japanese elements in the growth and evolution of Assam type architecture.
Okay. Thank you so much, Abhinavesh, for this really interesting talk. We've had a great time listening to you and looking at the visuals that you showed during your presentation. I would ask Abira to conclude our talk for today.
Thank you, Abhinavesh, and it was a wonderful session today. And then we would like to invite you to our gallery as well. Since you deal with the visual history, you deal with the cultural artifacts. Maybe, sorry, maybe your contribution can help us in designing some kind of knowledge tool or educational tool for our visitors as well. We can also elaborate some folklores which are associated with the artifacts. So thank you for coming for this session. We would like to have you again for our more NM talks. So thanks to everyone attending this session today, and we are winding up our series of interactive talks of Destination Northeast India Festival with this last talk. And today we will be having the last section of our cultural performances in the National Museum Auditorium. We would like to welcome you all for the valedictory as well. So thank you all, stay tuned. I'll keep following our social media handle, National Museum Facebook page, and also our Instagram handle. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.